Hey everyone, welcome back. Let's take a look at what we've got going on today.
And landing. Touchdown right there. It's not far. They're not going fast, guys.
Oh, I see what the problem is here. This is another video by Enslaved by No Media. Now, the point he's trying to make here is that since these planes aren't landing at the speed that he thinks that they should be, that means that the Earth is smaller than it actually is. But there's a problem. I've already established that aviation isn't something that he knows much of anything about. But in this case, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt for one reason and one reason only. He's not measuring the correct kind of speed. He calculated ground speed. His math would be correct to a reasonable degree if aircraft did much of anything non-navigation related by using ground speed, but they don't. We're going to use the UH-1 November helicopter for this explanation for a couple of reasons. First, it's because I'm very familiar with them. I worked on them for more than a decade, and secondly, the explanation I need to give is going to apply across all airframes. We're not worried about what's outside, so let's hop in the cockpit real quick. Wow, it's been a long time since I've been in one of these. Sorry, nostalgia. Anyway, I know it looks like there's a lot going on here, and there is. And while I can give a class on every single one of these indicators, switches, and controls, we're only focused on one thing today. This indicator that I've got highlighted is the airspeed indicator. And airspeed is the metric that he should have used. So what's the difference between ground speed and airspeed? Well, ground speed is the measurement of an aircraft's horizontal movement in relation to the Earth. It's how they figure out where they're at, what point they're at on the planet, and how far they've traveled. Airspeed, on the other hand, is the measurement of the plane's speed through the surrounding air mass in reference to it. Airspeed is used to determine several things, from stall speeds, landing and takeoff speeds, things like that. Airspeed is usually measured by a PDOT static probe, or a PDOT tube, as it's otherwise known. What happens is air is forced into the tip, and the resulting pressure from that is compared against a static air pressure, measured from a tiny pinhole on the side of the probe. Those two measurements together are what drive the needle and give you your airspeed indication, specifically your indicated airspeed, because there are a few different types of airspeed. There's calibrated airspeed, there's indicated airspeed, true airspeed, but for right now, the explanation that I need to give, we can use indicated airspeed. Because the air mass moves due to wind currents, airspeed and ground speed are not always going to marry up. In this case, the distinction between airspeed and ground speed is important for one reason: lift. As I've stated before, aircraft take off into and land into the wind to generate the maximum amount of lift that they can. I'm not willing to accept his calculations here for a couple of reasons. First off, he does not specify the type of aircraft that he's watching. Sure, 747 type is pretty general, and yes, there are several kinds of planes that look like a Boeing 747 model, but that doesn't make them a Boeing 747. And even in the 747 class, you have different types of aircraft, and their landing speeds vary because of that. Secondly, because he's calculating this based on the maximum allowable landing weight, which on its own is rare. You're not always going to have an aircraft that's at the maximum landing weight. Very often they're going to be lighter, and because they're lighter, they don't need to move as quickly to generate sufficient lift to stay in the air. They can land at slower speeds. Maintaining an airspeed of 155 knots in this case would require that the aircraft be flying into a headwind that is moving at 67 knots, or around 77 miles an hour. Since he's not getting blown around, it's safe to assume that this aircraft is not at its maximum allowable landing weight. It is substantially lighter and has adjusted its speed as necessary to come in for a slower landing, because if it was not fully loaded, the lack of weight, if it was still moving at 155 knots, it would be generating too much lift to land. Now, bear in mind that aircraft takeoff and landing speeds are affected by a number of things that he does not account for. Including weight, you also have to take into account the air density, the altitude of the airport, the temperature, the air density, your flap settings. There's a lot of stuff that goes into calculating your landing speed. Now, aircraft manufacturers make an operating handbook that have charts inside them that allow pilots to quickly and easily make these calculations based on the operating limits of the airframe that the manufacturer has stated. But the way that he calculated the speed ignores quite a bit. So, no, Dave, we aren't being lied to about the size of the Earth. You just don't know what you're talking about. Also, as a public service, what you're doing in the clip I'm about to show makes you a hazard to you and those around you. So fucking stop.
This is where I first started seeing them, on the other side of the water here. Okay, so flying over the highway, I mean, they're coming in, that's probably 500 feet in the air, if that. So they're coming in low for a long time.
No, if you are 4 miles out from touchdown, your aircraft is probably around 1,000 feet in the air. The basic rule of thumb here is most aircraft of the commercial variety take about 3 nautical miles to shed 1,000 feet of altitude. They can obviously shed this faster, but for a nice smooth approach landing, it's generally 3 nautical miles to lose 1,000 feet of altitude. So again, we see that you don't know what you're talking about. A few minutes on Google would correct this, but something tells me that you think pilots are in on the conspiracy to cover up a small flat Earth for some reason. Well, that's it for now. This is a nice short video. Aviation is one of the things that I enjoy talking about, and it's partly because I spent a vast majority of my adult life working on these things. So I want people to understand what's actually happening when they're in a plane and what the planes are actually doing instead of just going off of what this guy doesn't know. But anyway, I can be found in these places as usual. The Discord server's finally up, although since I'm not very adept at designing the layout of the Discord, I'm having a hard time figuring out how to make a patrons only section. And speaking of which, if you're not a patron, please consider becoming one. Every little bit helps me put out better content more often. Stop by and chat, drop me some video ideas, and as always, stay curious.